everybody. It is nice to see a full screen of people, some familiar and some not. So thanks for coming tonight. I'm Michael Munson, and I am going to get to sit back tonight and listen to Caleb, who is going to share a lot of stuff about cool communication and what is it, our title? Cool communication in hot times or something like that. Our normal format is our normal format is different every time. So today we're going to be on camera if folks would like to be on camera. Hopefully folks in our age of COVID know how to be on camera if you'd like. So usually there's a little button at the bottom that says share video. So I'm going to turn things over to Caleb, and then maybe I can remind us what's going to happen next week or later this week when you're done. Cool. So Caleb is one of our staff members and is going to lead us tonight.
Awesome. Thanks, Michael. I'm Caleb. I use he, him pronouns. And I think my favorite form of communication is face-to-face at a picnic. Ideally, we can get started. Thanks, everybody, for sharing your favorite forms of communication. And, you know, we're learning that there's so many different forms of communication, especially right now, and we're all communicating over video and still seeing each other's faces. So today we're going to talk a bit about communication in difficult situations when maybe we have a lot of emotions coming up. And we'll kind of base the discussion around nonviolent communication skills, which it sounds like some of you may already have some background in. I would say that I have experience using it, but not super formal experience. I've taken a couple of workshops, so I don't consider myself to be an expert in it, and I am just sharing some of the very basic skills that I have in my own communication toolkit, and hopefully those will be useful for other people. And I'm also hoping if people have ideas or suggestions or things that come up as we're talking, that you're also welcome to add those ideas kind of collaboratively. So these tools that we'll be talking about can be used in conflicts, but as I just was reminded of recently, they aren't always effective in conflicts, and sometimes you can be using the skills that you have and still not feel like other people are hearing you and not be able to connect with other people. But at the same time, I think the tools we'll talk about are really useful for connecting with your own emotions and your own needs, even if it's still difficult to convey those to other people. And when we're more aware of what's going on for us, we can strategize even on our own about what we can do to meet those needs. So that's kind of where we'll start for today. So first, I want to talk about the assumptions of nonviolent communication as a basis for the rest of the ideas that we'll talk about. So the first one is that all human beings share the same needs. And just to also say, these are only a few of the assumptions of NVC, but these are more of the basic ones that I want to start with. So all human beings share the same needs. So we all have certain physical needs for food, for water, for our physical safety, but we also share emotional needs like connection with other people, understanding, respect, and I'll give a lot of ideas later for other needs that we share. We may have different priorities, we may have different values from other people, but we share a lot of common needs, and that's one way that we can connect with one another, is realizing that we share those same needs. The second assumption is that all actions are attempts to meet needs. So on a really basic level, if we feel hungry and we have a need for food, eating food meets that need. And, you know, that also goes into interpersonal realms. So if we are needing connection with other people or interaction, choosing to spend time with someone face-to-face, for example, is a way that we can meet that need. And especially during COVID, that's something we're seeing as kind of a balance of making choices that allow us to meet our needs for connection with our safety. And then the third assumption is feelings point to needs being met or unmet. So the feelings that come up for us, our emotions, can give us a lot of information about what we're needing, and what needs might be met or unmet. So, back to the example of if you're feeling hungry, it might point to that you're needing some food, and that need for food is not met. And some things might be a little harder to identify what we're actually needing. Like if we're feeling lonely, that might mean that our need for social connection isn't being met in that moment. And it can also go the other way. Feelings that we generally consider more positive, like joy or contentment, can point to that we do have certain needs met, like our needs for rest, or social interaction. When we have those emotions of fulfillment, those needs might be being met. And nonviolent communication assumes that most human conflicts between individuals or groups arise from miscommunications about human needs. So this idea is that when we're communicating, a lot of our really essential and shared feelings and needs can get lost, because in conflict especially, there are other things that can get in the way and become noise, like when we have judgments, when we're telling ourselves stories about what's happening, that aren't objective, and we're communicating those to other people instead of what we're feeling. That can get in the way of other people understanding the human feelings and needs that we have that may not be being met. And also generalizations are another thing that can get in the way and cause miscommunication. When we're noticing something happening in a pattern, and we, kind of generalize to, oh, this always happens, and we communicate to other people, that can also get in the way of connecting over those shared needs. So this page I'll come back to this also, but has some ideas, I'm trying to zoom in, of some basic feelings we all have, and basic needs we all have. So at the top, we can see feelings when our needs are fulfilled. So some ideas for when our needs are being met, just some different descriptions of how we might be feeling, and feelings when needs are not fulfilled. And I like these because they get pretty specific. So sometimes it's nice to look at a list. If you're not totally sure what's going on and you're feeling something in your body, to look at a list of ideas and kind of ask what sounds right for how you're feeling. And then some of the basic needs we all have, there are a couple of categories. So physical nurturance is kind of the basic physical needs that we all have. And beyond those, there are a lot of other needs that involve other parts of life and are a little bit more abstract, but that we all share. So it can also be good, I think, to look at a list, or there are also cards that you can get that have feelings or needs listed on them. And those can be great for trying to identify or guess at what your needs are that are being met or not being met in that moment. So we're going to talk about the 4 components of nonviolent communication. So there are 4 components of communication, and we'll start with observations. So observations involve an objective view of what happened, and this is separate from our judgments or perceptions about what happened. So if something happened that was difficult, like a conflict, the way my mom and I have talked about this in the past, an observation is what the camera sees. And that tends to be, when you frame it that way, it tends to be easier to identify the events that happen instead of the stories that we're filling in for ourselves. So to have an example situation, one I thought of is that I had plans with a friend today, but she canceled this morning. So that's the situation. And judgments come up when things like that happen. So for example, I might think, well, then that means she doesn't value my friendship, and she's being selfish and she's being irresponsible. Um, and I might also generalize about that if this is something that has happened before or multiple times. I might think she always does this, she always cancels plans. But that judgment and that generalization are not the events that happen. So my observation, if I'm looking at things through a camera, might be I had plans with a friend today, but she texted me this morning to say that she couldn't make it. So that's the first part. And we'll get into later how we link these together to phrase something that we're trying to express to someone else. So the next component is feelings. So these are the emotions and that we can feel in our bodies. And it helps to be as specific as possible when we're trying to identify these feelings, because sharing those with other people can help us to relate, because we all have felt these things at one point or another. So when we're being specific, it helps to communicate to other people exactly what's going on for us. And it also helps to hear what other people are feeling. And these help us to identify the needs that are met or unmet. So in my hypothetical scenario, if my friend canceled on me this morning, I might be noticing that my throat feels really tight, and I might relate that with sadness. I might be feeling sad. I might also feel really hot and restless, and that might mean that I'm really frustrated. I might also feel lonely because I'm missing out on that social interaction. So the next component are needs. So we've talked about this a little bit, and our feelings help us notice what needs are being met or unmet when we encounter a difficult situation. So in this situation, my need for respect might not be being met, because we all want our time to be respected, and to be respected as human beings. Also connection, missing out on spending time with another person. If I'm feeling lonely, that might indicate to me that my need for connection and socialization is not being met. Another one that comes up for me a lot is predictability. I'm someone who likes to know what my plans are ahead of time, and not have those change a lot. So the fact that I'm feeling frustrated might indicate that need for predictability is not being met. And then the last component is making a request. So when you've identified your feelings and needs, that those elements can help us to identify what would help us to feel better to meet those needs. And then you can make a request of another person that would help meet that need. So if I was putting all of these elements together to express to someone what I was feeling, I might say something like, and this is starting with the observation, when you canceled our plans today, I felt really sad and frustrated because my needs for respect, connection, and predictability were not being met. Would you be willing to commit to spending time together on another day? And I would probably elaborate on other things, but just to simplify, that's one way that you can kind of put together those different elements. And in this slide, this is another way to kind of visualize the way we might express what we're feeling. So starting with the observation, when I see or hear blank, I feel blank because I need blank. And would you be willing to blank? And sometimes we don't have requests figured out when we are communicating with someone. Sometimes we just know that something doesn't feel right and we want to communicate that, and then maybe we can work with that person to come up with an agreement going forward. So sometimes just starting with the observation, feeling, and need is a good place to start. So figuring out my screen sharing thing. So what we were kind of doing is workshopping ways of self-expression, forms of self-expression. So sometimes it can be really helpful to work with another person when you've just experienced something really difficult. And I had a moment earlier today where I knew I was just feeling really intense emotions. and I just didn't know what to do or how to express those. So I called a friend on the phone. I was just like, I know that I need to talk to somebody. And that really helped me to get clarity on what I was feeling and needing, and what some requests might be that I can make. So, talking with somebody else who can kind of make guesses about that, I think can be really helpful for identifying what you can do going forward, and what you can do to meet your needs. I want to scroll down. So this is kind of the process that we've been talking about. In nonviolent communication, there are two main forms of communication. So we've been talking about, can everybody see this okay? Self-expression. So that's the, when I observe this, I feel this because I need this, and then requesting, asking somebody if they would be willing to do something else. And empathy is the other kind of half of the equation. So when somebody is expressing what's going on for them, one thing that we can do to help other people feel heard, is to just reflect back. And it sounds really simple, but it can be really difficult to do, sometimes, to reflect back what we're hearing. So that might sound like, when you see or hear this, are you feeling? That can also be the guessing part, because you need, and would you like this? And I think this can be useful when somebody isn't using, a 4-step NVC process, and they're maybe expressing something that, is difficult to hear. It can help to make some guesses and see if you can empathize with what's going on for them, and asking those questions. When you're, if you're hearing somebody, their, voice is getting really loud and you can see that there are emotions coming up. Are you feeling angry right now? I'm guessing you're feeling really frustrated. Is that because you're needing, blank? And that, can help to identify for them, and also for you to understand that better. So empathy is really important. It's putting ourselves in somebody else's shoes and trying to really deeply understand, what they're feeling and needing. And this is a really great way to connect with other people, because we do share, so many feelings and needs. And it can also help for, each person to feel heard, and understood. So something I've noticed is that if I'm in a conflict with someone, the need to be heard can get in the way of coming to any, making requests or coming to any resolutions, because if people don't feel heard, then, people aren't as open to getting to that point. So it can be really helpful to offer empathy to someone who might be getting defensive, in a conflict, in a conversation, to see if you can understand where they're coming from. And when that person feels heard, they might have more openness to also hear where you're coming from. So that can be difficult to do. But if you do have the, mental space and capacity to give somebody the option to be heard first, that might open up more, lines of communication. I'm going to stop screen sharing, and if people are open to this, I have a meditation, that my mom suggested we do, about identifying needs. So let me just read this. Do you have any suggestions for how to do this when you're feeling triggered? Someone is angry and shouting at you and you want to de-escalate, but you're also triggered, angry at what the person is saying. I think that's a really, important thing to talk about, because it comes up all the time. And when those emotions are really intense, it makes it even harder to, I think, communicate what we're feeling in our bodies and separate those feelings from the judgments and the stories that we're telling, because it can go really quickly to, blame and judgments, and using you statements instead of sticking with what, I statements and what's going on for us. You see feelings and needs underlying their words, but the words are also the forefront of your feelings. I think that's something that comes up all the time. And Lurie has a great suggestion, which is take a break. I really like that suggestion to just give everybody a chance to cool off a little bit. One thing I might try, and I did do this earlier today in my own situation, was saying, wow, I'm feeling really intense emotions right now, hearing what you just said. And I wasn't totally able to articulate what that was yet, but I knew that I needed to like recognize that and not, that was a way to take a break before I said anything else that might be, not as kind, because I'm not able to like step away from those really intense emotions. So acknowledging that, I just heard you say something, and it's making me feel some really intense emotions right now. So I think I need a little break and a little bit of time to kind of formulate what I'd like to say and how, so that I can communicate more clearly. That might be a good option. A break for self-empathy. Step away, and if available, find a safe outlet to vent, to get emotional burst out, so you can get back to more level-headed point. A really great idea too, because when we do have really intense emotions, it's great to be able to just express those and let them come out and go. Maybe you need to express that in a physical way too, and that can make it difficult to communicate when you really just want to express like anger or sadness or something. That might get in the way of saying particular words that other people might be able to hear. But then once you're able to step away and do that, it might be easier to put those feelings into words, to communicate them to someone else. So I think those are some really great strategies. All right. Thank you so much, everybody, for sharing those thoughts and for coming tonight. I know we're over time, but Michael, is there anything you wanted to add to wrap up?
No, thanks everybody for sticking through well, not sticking through, but being here the whole time. And I think it was really a rich experience tonight. So thank you all for participating, and thank you, Caleb, for leading the way tonight. Another program on Thursday night with Janice Cawley. It'll be kind of a mix of art and meditation. I put the link up in the chat earlier, and we would love to hear your feedback. Evaluation should pop up as soon as we close out tonight. So but thank you, everybody, and thank you, Caleb. And thank you to our interpreters who've been like really smooth and going back and forth. So, yay.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good rest of your night.